The chandeliers inside the Vanderlei Grand Hotel gleamed like frozen stars, each one suspended above a sea of wealth and whispers. Beneath their glow, the city's most powerful gathered. Men and women dressed in confidence more than silk, smiling the way only people do when they believe the world belongs to them. The Grant Group's annual Investor Gala wasn't a celebration, it was a performance. Every handshake meant leverage, every toast a transaction. The sound of clinking glasses filled the hall, echoing off marble that seemed polished with arrogance. Waiters glided between tables carrying trays of champagne that cost more than most people's rent. Laughter rose in well-rehearsed waves, every guest competing to be heard, to be seen. Near the center stood Sterling Grant, the host, a man who treated charm like currency. His family name was stamped on steel towers, shipping ports, and political donations. Power wasn't something he earned, it was something he inherited and guarded like an heirloom. Sterling lifted his glass, eyes sweeping over the crowd as if counting assets. His voice carried with ease, trained, confident, self-assured. "To legacy," he announced, pausing for effect, "and to those who built this nation's backbone, generation after generation." The applause came instantly. No one clapped because they agreed. They clapped because silence in this room was a kind of betrayal. But then, just as the orchestra shifted into its next number, the heavy doors opened. Two figures stepped inside. The woman's gown shimmered faintly in the golden light. Understated elegance, nothing loud, nothing begging for attention. The man beside her walked with quiet strength, his suit well-fitted but simple, his expression calm. They didn't move like guests hoping to belong. They moved like people who had already earned their place in every room they entered. And that's precisely why the room froze. Glances turned into murmurs. Murmurs sharpened into whispers. Waiters slowed mid-step, unsure if they should offer the newcomers a glass. A few guests exchanged knowing smirks, the kind that said they don't belong here. Sterling noticed the shift immediately. His smile tightened, his glass lowering ever so slightly as his gaze locked on the couple. For a man used to being the center of gravity, the presence of people who didn't bow to his orbit was unsettling. He leaned toward one of his associates and muttered something under his breath. Whatever it was, it made the man chuckle. Low, cruel, quiet. The orchestra played on, but the mood had shifted. The woman, Margaret Cole, took her husband's arm gently, her fingers resting with effortless grace. Elias Cole nodded toward a passing waiter and reached for 2 glasses of champagne. The waiter hesitated, eyes flicking to Sterling before reluctantly handing them over. That hesitation was all it took. The tone of the night changed. A cluster of guests near the piano whispered loudly enough to be heard. "Did they say who invited them?" one asked. "Maybe they're part of the staff." Another laughed softly. "Then they're overdressed for the job." It was the kind of cruelty that wears perfume, quiet, polite, and deadly. Still, the Coles stood tall. They didn't shrink. They didn't fumble or apologize for existing in that space. Margaret lifted her glass with a small, knowing smile. Not defiance, not pride, just quiet certainty. It made the laughter around them falter. But not for long. Sterling's daughter, Khloe Grant, appeared with her phone raised, streaming the moment live to her followers. "Oh, this is rich," she whispered to her friend beside her. "Heritage Night just got interesting." The phone tilted slightly toward the couple, catching their stillness in the middle of the glittering crowd. The comments began flooding in. "Who are they? Wrong event?" Staff trying to blend in. Laughter rippled again, spreading through the hall like a slow poison. Yet amid the mockery, the couple didn't flinch. Elias took a sip of champagne. Margaret's eyes stayed on the chandelier above them, as if none of it mattered, and maybe it didn't, because the people who laughed had no idea who they were really looking at. In less than an hour, the name Cole would burn through every headline in America. By the time the night ended, Sterling Grant's entire empire and a $66 billion deal would begin to crumble. But in that moment, surrounded by chandeliers and champagne, no one saw the storm quietly forming behind 2 steady smiles. If you're already hooked by this night's beginning, make sure to hit like and subscribe to Echoes of Hope Stories HQ, where true, human stories meet justice. Tell us in the comments what country you're watching from. Your story might just mirror one like this. Sterling Grant's smirk arrived before his words did. He watched Elias and Margaret Cole from across the ballroom, that small, measured smile of a man who thought he'd already defined everyone in the room. He took one last sip of his champagne, then turned toward the stage, tapping his glass lightly with a silver knife. The chatter dimmed instantly. The orchestra fell silent mid-note. Every eye shifted to him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sterling began, his voice rich and commanding. "What a joy to see so many familiar faces tonight. Our family has always believed that gatherings like this are about more than just profit margins and stock portfolios. They're about heritage, about legacy." He paused deliberately, eyes sliding toward the Coles. "You see, America was built by visionaries, by families who knew the value of hard work, perseverance, and bloodline." Polite laughter drifted through the hall, the kind that disguised discomfort. Sterling's words, however, weren't hiding anything. His gaze didn't leave Elias and Margaret. "Heritage," he continued, "isn't just what we pass down in money, but in name. It's about those who built, and those who served in that building." He smiled wider, tilting his head slightly as if delivering a lesson. "Both roles important, of course, but not quite the same, wouldn't you agree?" More laughter, forced, nervous, indulgent. Margaret's hand tightened slightly on Elias's arm. She didn't look away. Her eyes were steady, calm, the kind that saw through centuries of this same performance. Elias gave a faint nod, his jaw unmoved, his back straight as if he'd been waiting his entire life for a moment like this. The waiters resumed their rounds, trays of champagne glinting under the light. One of them, a young man with trembling hands, approached the Coles table, then froze mid-step. He looked toward Sterling for silent approval. Sterling caught it instantly. He grinned and lifted his voice so it carried across the ballroom. "Oh, it's fine," he said, waving a hand. "They can have a drink too." The two landed like a slap. The laughter that followed wasn't kind. It was jagged, careless, hungry for permission to mock. The waiter hesitated only a second longer before setting 2 flutes down before the couple. His cheeks burned red as he hurried away. Elias raised his glass slowly, meeting Sterling's gaze across the crowd. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. That silence, proud, unbending, was louder than any toast. Margaret, graceful as ever, clinked her glass against his. "To legacy," she said softly. Her tone wasn't mocking, but it carried the weight of truth. A truth the room wasn't ready to hear. A woman at a nearby table leaned toward her husband. "Do they even know anyone here?" she whispered. Her husband shrugged. "Probably from the service entrance. Someone must have made a mistake." The woman chuckled, covering her mouth with manicured fingers. "Well, they certainly dressed for the occasion." The sound reached Margaret's ears. She didn't flinch. Elias placed his hand gently over hers. "Let them talk," he murmured. "They only see what their money allows." Sterling continued his speech, basking in his own echo. "My grandfather built the Grant Group with bare hands," he declared, his baritone swelling. "He employed thousands, fed families, shaped skylines. That's the kind of heritage we celebrate tonight, the builders of America." Someone near the front clapped. Others followed, unwilling to be left out of the performance. Sterling's eyes flickered again toward Elias, a flicker of disdain wrapped in curiosity. The couple didn't clap. They sat still, dignified. It bothered him. He stepped down from the stage, still holding his glass. "And of course," he continued, now speaking directly as he walked closer to their table, "we're always happy to see new faces. Reminds us of how far this nation's hospitality stretches." The laughter rose again, sharper now. Margaret looked up at him, unshaken. "Hospitality," she said evenly, "isn't measured by who enters your room, but how they're treated once inside." The room went quiet for a breath too long. Sterling blinked, his smile faltering for just a second before he recovered. "Ah," he said, nodding faintly, "a poet. Well said." He raised his glass again. "To heritage," he proclaimed, his tone slick with irony. "To truth," Elias replied, his deep voice cutting through the air. A few guests gasped. Others laughed awkwardly, unsure which side of the moment to stand on. The orchestra began to play again, rescuing Sterling from his discomfort. He turned away with a practiced grin, but his steps were a little too quick. His jaw tightened as murmurs followed him. From the corner, Khloe Grant captured the entire exchange on her phone, whispering to her friend, "My dad's gonna lose it later." Elias and Margaret sat silently as the music swelled. Their glasses remained full. Around them, luxury and prejudice mixed like champagne and bitterness, effervescent, beautiful, and cruel. But what no one realized, not even Sterling, was that this quiet confrontation was the beginning of something much larger. Because by the end of the night, the story of heritage would belong to someone else entirely. Khloe Grant's phone glowed like a spotlight as she wandered through the ballroom, her fingers deftly swiping the screen to capture every detail. "This is going to be perfect for my followers," she whispered to a friend, voice tight with excitement. "Look at them, real guests of circumstance." She panned the camera slowly across the room, circling back to Elias and Margaret Cole. Her lips curved into a smirk as she tilted the lens toward Margaret's gown, modest, elegant, understated, then back to her own laughing face. "Notice the posture," Khloe said, deliberately exaggerating her tone. "Such poise, but completely out of place, right?" The livestream chat exploded instantly. Messages scrolled in rapid-fire succession. Who invited them? Thought this was the gala for actual people. Someone needs to teach them the dress code. Khloe's grin widened. She read a few aloud, laughing as if the room's attention belonged entirely to her. "Oh, they're loving this," she said, feeding the crowd's cruelty with every gesture. The phone trembled slightly in her hand, either from excitement or the deliberate thrill of manipulation. Meanwhile, Margaret Cole remained perfectly still. Her eyes were fixed on the crystal chandelier above the ballroom, its light catching the soft shimmer of her gown. She didn't flinch. She didn't meet Khloe's lens. Her calm presence radiated dignity, a quiet refusal to participate in the spectacle Khloe was orchestrating. Elias took a slow sip of champagne, the movement smooth, deliberate. He glanced briefly at the live feed reflected on Khloe's screen, noting the comments scrolling endlessly, but made no expression that could give her satisfaction. His silence, steady and unyielding, was louder than any outburst could have been. The room, however, was unsettled. Guests shifted in their seats, exchanging uneasy glances. Some chuckled nervously at Khloe's jokes, unsure if they were supposed to join in. Others paused mid-laugh, sensing that the intended target was entirely Unshaken. Whispers bounced from one table to the next. Why aren't they reacting? Shouldn't they be embarrassed? It's almost uncomfortable. Sterling noticed the change immediately. His face, previously smug, tightened imperceptibly as he followed Khloe's antics. He tapped a finger on the stem of his glass, irritation building beneath the surface. "Khloe," he murmured under his breath, "keep it subtle." Khloe only smiled wider, deliberately defying him. Her fingers danced across the screen, zooming in on the Coles' faces. "Oh no, Dad," she whispered. "This is gold. The whole audience will love it." The comments continued pouring in, darker now, bolder, spurred on by Khloe's provocation. "They don't belong here. Servants trying to look fancy. Someone escort them out, please." But the Coles remained immovable. Margaret's gaze never faltered. Elias' hand rested lightly on the table, calm as stone. Their stillness carried an invisible weight, the kind that unsettles people accustomed to controlling the narrative with laughter and mockery. Across the room, a few guests began to notice the dissonance. Their eyes narrowed, scanning faces for subtle cracks of emotion, searching for a sign that the Coles were intimidated. They found none. Instead, each measured step, each quiet sip, each glance upward at the chandelier only reinforced the unspoken power these two held. Power Sterling's family name couldn't command. The tension in the room thickened, and Khloe's live broadcast unintentionally amplified it. "Why aren't they reacting?" one viewer typed. "Do they know something we don't?" Another replied, "This is too much. They're untouchable." It was true. In rooms built on pride, composure is rebellion. Margaret's stillness was a shield, Elias' calm a statement. Every moment they refused to bow to humiliation stripped the gilded room of its perceived control. Khloe, oblivious to the subtle shift in energy, continued narrating her own version of the scene. "Notice how they stand. So quiet, so rigid. Isn't this just adorable?" She laughed, unaware that the audience's curiosity was beginning to overtake their initial amusement. Sterling cleared his throat loudly, trying to reclaim the attention of the crowd, but the Cole's serenity made his words feel hollow. Guests leaned toward one another, exchanging muted, uncertain glances. Even the orchestra seemed quieter, as if the music sensed the tension, playing softer than before. The live chat continued racing, a mix of mockery and intrigue. And in that charged atmosphere, it became clear. The public humiliation intended to dominate the evening was failing. The more the Kholes ignored it, the more the room's confidence faltered. And far from backing down, Elias and Margaret were silently preparing to turn this spectacle on its head. A reversal no one, not even Sterling or Khloe, could have anticipated. Khloe's live stream had reached far beyond the confines of the Vanderlei Grand Ballroom. Phones buzzed on tables, notifications chimed, and within minutes, the world outside began to filter in. Guests who had once leaned into Khloe's mockery now leaned into their screens, fingers typing names, scrolling through headlines, scanning news articles. A murmur spread like wildfire. "Khole Industries?" whispered one guest under their breath, eyes wide. Another leaned closer to confirm. "Isn't that the energy company worth billions?" The room's laughter faltered. A few claps became hesitant. The orchestra's strings hummed softer, as if sensing the shift in the air. For the first time that evening, Sterling felt a flicker of unease, though he masked it with practiced poise. He raised his glass again, voice projecting over the murmurs. "Legacy is everything," he declared, smiling at the audience. "Some guests just don't understand the walls they walk into. Heritage is earned, carried through generations, and some simply weren't chosen." The words, meant to reinforce his control, now echoed strangely in the hall. Every eye turned toward the Kholes, but this time curiosity mixed with surprise. Margaret straightened her posture slightly, calm as ever, her expression unreadable but commanding. Elias sipped his drink, measured and almost serene. A ripple of whispers passed from table to table. Phones were raised discreetly, searches conducted in haste. "They're the Khole couple?" one guest breathed, voice low. "The founders of Khole Industries? That's impossible." "Billionaires," another muttered, lips barely moving. "And here we were laughing at them." The laughter that followed Khloe's live stream now curdled into awkward coughs, stifled snickers. Guests shifted in their seats, some turning to each other, heads tilted, as if trying to reconcile the scene before them with the reputations they were discovering online. Sterling's composure was unwavering outwardly, yet inside, irritation flickered. He glanced toward Khloe, who was oblivious to the storm brewing beyond her screen. She laughed softly, reading comments aloud. "Wait, that's them? Khole Industries owns half the East Coast energy grid. They aren't staff. They are the company." Sterling forced a chuckle, tapping his glass. "Ah, yes. Legacy," he said, projecting confidence as he circled the room, eyes glinting with bravado. "It's always amusing to see how some guests misunderstand their surroundings. Remember, my friends, history has walls built for those who belong. And for the rest," he smirked, "well, lessons are learned." The tension in the room had subtly shifted. The Kholes' silence was no longer merely endurance, it was strategy. Margaret's calm gaze and Elias's measured stillness now commanded attention, subtly bending the room's perception. No one laughed freely anymore. Some whispered hurriedly, pulling out phones to confirm the names. A young man near the back leaned toward his companion. "Do you see what's happening?" he murmured, eyes darting between Sterling and the couple. "Everyone's Googling them. They're untouchable." Sterling, oblivious, raised his glass again, speaking with deliberate drama. "Some guests just don't grasp the weight of heritage," he said, voice rich, smooth, meant to reclaim dominance. "They see walls and they forget who built them. And that," he said, sweeping a hand toward the Kholes, "is where the problem begins." But the crowd no longer followed him blindly. Phones tapped, search bars filled, whispers turned to hushed exclamations. The aura of inevitability Sterling had counted on began to fracture. Margaret adjusted her gown slightly, a subtle movement, yet enough to command the attention of those around her. Elias's eyes swept the room slowly, unflinching. The couple didn't need to speak. Their silence now carried weight, anticipation. The mocking edge in the air transformed into something else, a room holding its breath, sensing that the evening's narrative was about to flip. Whispers became questions. Are they really the Kholes? Billionaires? Khole Industries? Sterling's smirk remained, yet for the first time, the polished lines of his performance couldn't entirely conceal the unease creeping into the room. The tension had changed flavor, from public humiliation to the suspense of revelation. And as the murmurs grew, as phones illuminated faces and curiosity sharpened, it became clear. Tonight, the rules of power were about to be rewritten. Sterling continued his performance. Glass raised high, voice smooth as silk yet sharp with derision. "And so, my friends," he said, scanning the room, "we celebrate those who carry history in their veins." And then, he let his gaze linger on Elias and Margaret Cole. "There are those who merely observe it." Laughter bubbled from nearby tables, polite and rehearsed, but a subtle tension had begun to creep in beneath the veneer of amusement. Near the back of the ballroom, Elias lowered his champagne glass just enough to engage a man seated quietly, Thomas Hale, a member of the city's high-profile investment board. His voice was measured, low, careful, yet carried weight. Margaret, her posture immaculate, spoke softly beside him, leaning in only slightly, ensuring no one overheard. Thomas glanced at his phone, brows knitting as he scrolled through notifications, his face drained of color. He murmured something under his breath, barely audible, and then quickly leaned toward Sterling's CFO, whispering urgently. The words were incomprehensible to the rest of the room, but the effect was immediate. The laughter at the other tables faltered. Some guests stopped mid-cheer, glancing around nervously, their expressions subtly shifting from amusement to curiosity. One by one, individuals began stepping away from their seats. A man pretended to take a call. A woman claimed she needed to check a message, and a few couples drifted toward the edges of the room, feigning casual interest in the decor. All the while, their eyes remained on the Coles. Sterling, noticing the thinning crowd at his immediate circle, shrugged lightly. He interpreted the movement as boredom or mild disinterest, a temporary lull he could easily overcome. He leaned slightly toward the nearest table, voice louder, dripping with sarcasm. "Look at them, Margaret," he said, indicating the couple, "as if they've stepped out of some museum of charity night. Really, the finest examples of observing civility, aren't they?" His words cut across the polished air of the ballroom, intended to draw laughter, to regain control of the attention slipping from his grasp. Margaret's eyes, calm and unyielding, met his without a flicker of anger or embarrassment. Then, in a voice clear enough for those closest to hear, yet soft and steady, she spoke. "Charity, Mr. Grant, is what built this city's illusion of grace." The room stilled. The orchestra's soft hum seemed to fade into silence, as though the music itself were holding its breath. Heads turned subtly, the chatter of the previous minutes evaporating as every pair of eyes shifted toward the Coles. Sterling froze mid-laugh, glass halfway to his lips, as if the words had physically struck him. Elias leaned slightly forward, his tone calm, yet with a weight that carried authority. "It is easy to wear wealth like armor," he said, voice low and deliberate. "It is harder to earn respect that cannot be bought or borrowed. Tonight, the distinction is clear." The whispering that had begun with hushed online searches transformed into audible murmurs across the tables. Phones were raised discreetly again, guests scanning screens for confirmation. Recognition dawning as the pieces fell into place. Faces that had once sneered now carried uncertainty. Sterling's smirk wavered. He cleared his throat, attempting to regain momentum, but the sharp edge of Margaret's statement lingered, biting at his carefully curated image. The Coles' composure, their calm defiance, had begun to shift the room's power dynamics. The laughter, intended as reinforcement of Sterling's dominance, had been replaced with attention, curiosity, and a growing undercurrent of respect, recognition that even he could not command. The ballroom's energy had pivoted subtly, yet irrevocably. Where there had been mockery, there was now a cautious pause. Where there had been ridicule, there was intrigue. The tension, once dominated by the arrogance of one family, now centered on the quiet authority of two people who refused to bend. And in that stillness, as Sterling tried to navigate the first cracks in his performance, it became clear the evening was no longer his to control. The Coles were poised, patient, and ready to expose a truth that would reverberate far beyond the crystal chandeliers of the Vanderlei Grand. The first vibration came from the table near the back. A phone buzzed, then another. Soon, almost every device in the Vanderlei Grand ballroom chimed insistently, notifications flashing across screens like wildfire. Khloe's live stream, meant for ridicule, had now become the spark of something far larger. Guests, initially amused, swiped through their phones with widening eyes. Headlines scrolled across feeds. Grant CEO mocks founders of coal industries, $66 renewable energy merger at risk. Billionaire heiress live streams insult. Investors demand answers. Sterling froze mid-step, glass raised as the first whispers of panic threaded through the hall. His carefully cultivated smirk faltered, replaced by the twitch of disbelief. The room's laughter, once eager and gleeful, died in a strangled chorus of coughs and nervous shuffling. "Is this real?" muttered a man near the center, eyes locked on his screen. "They're the Coles?" Elias and Margaret stood steady, unchanged, as if the entire hall's sudden recognition was a background murmur rather than the center of the storm. Margaret's gaze swept slowly across the crowd, calm and unshakable. Elias's hands rested lightly on the table edge, composed. Their dignity acted as a silent anchor amid the chaotic realization sweeping through Sterling's empire. Khloe's fingers froze on her phone. The live stream, once brimming with mockery, stalled mid-sentence. Comments that had been full of jokes now overflowed with shock, disbelief, and outrage. "They're the owners," one user typed frantically. $66 deal? This is insane." Sterling's face hardened at first, then paled as comprehension broke through his arrogance. The Coles were not accidental guests. They were the architects of the very empire he had intended to merge with. The only path to a $66 billion expansion deal that would solidify the Grant Group's dominance in renewable energy. The irony hit like a hammer. Every insult, every mocking gesture, every patronizing comment aimed at the Coles in a public misstep, broadcast to the world and to the very people whose favor he desperately needed. His confidence, so carefully constructed, began to crumble under the weight of humiliation and financial jeopardy. Whispers raced across tables. Phones were raised again, live feeds replaying the moments of Sterling's derision. Investors and guests scanned names, cross-referenced company logos, and shared articles with one another. Recognition grew, spreading like wildfire, and the energy in the room shifted from spectacle to dread. Sterling's attempted recovery fell flat. He stammered, a rare crack in the armor of entitlement. The words failed to land, and the audience's attention had entirely shifted. No one laughed, no one clapped. Instead, eyes darted between the Coles and the CEO. The power dynamic irreversibly flipped. Elias finally spoke, measured, calm. "Mr. Grant," he said, his voice steady, carrying over the hush that had descended, "we came to discuss the future of energy, not to be entertained." Margaret nodded, her gaze unwavering. "Respect is earned, not assumed, and tonight has clarified exactly where it belongs." The room held its breath. The moment was electric, the collision of arrogance, wealth, and realization. Sterling's empire, built on legacy and assumed superiority, now teetered on the edge of disaster, his $66 billion merger hanging in the balance because of a single misjudgment. Phones kept buzzing. Tweets, live shares, and breaking news alerts cascaded across social media. Investors began messaging their teams. Advisors whispered urgently to one another. The world outside the Vanderlei Grand had tuned in, and the Coles' silence contrasted sharply with Sterling's frantic unease. For the first time that night, Sterling Grant was no longer the dominant figure in the room. The couple he had mocked, calm, poised, commanding, had flipped the narrative entirely. Their quiet strength, their refusal to react to humiliation, had exposed the fragility behind his bluster. And as Sterling's smirk disappeared completely, replaced by a rigid, pale mask of shock, the room seemed to hold its collective breath, knowing the evening had changed forever. Khloe's phone buzzed in her hand. The live stream's comments no longer mocked. They questioned, they analyzed, they confirmed. The hum of recognition was deafening. In the heart of the Vanderlei Grand Ballroom, the realization was clear. The Coles were no ordinary guests. They were the gatekeepers to billions, and Sterling's arrogance had just put it all at risk. The room was silent, every eye fixed on the couple, waiting. The Vanderlei Grand Ballroom, once a stage for polished smiles and feigned civility, began to feel fragile, as though the gilded walls themselves were watching Sterling Grant's unraveling. Executives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, glancing at one another, then discreetly gathering their notes and phones. A subtle exodus began. One board member rose under the pretense of a call, another whispered to a colleague, and quietly slipped toward the exit. Sterling's eyes darted across the room, trying to anchor attention back to himself. His voice, meant to command, wavered. "Ladies and gentlemen, I assure you, it's a simple misunderstanding. Truly." He raised a hand, attempting a reassuring gesture, but the charm that had carried him through decades of business dealings now seemed brittle, hollow. Margaret and Elias remained statuesque in the center of the shifting crowd. Their presence no longer invited scrutiny, it demanded it. Guests stopped mid-whisper when their eyes landed on the couple, recognizing that their quiet dignity carried more authority than Sterling's loud assurances ever could. Margaret's hands rested lightly at her sides. Elias's posture was calm, unwavering. They said nothing, and yet the room felt the weight of their silence. It spoke of unshakable integrity, earned respect, and a quiet command of power. The murmurs grew louder, but not with ridicule. Whispers of astonishment wove through the tables. "That's them, the owners of Khloe Industries." They just turned the entire room upside down. Phones were raised again, photos snapped, screens capturing the irony of Sterling's floundering expression as headlines from social media played across small device screens. The laughter that had accompanied his every word now faded to a near silence, a stark contrast to the earlier spectacle. Sterling's face flushed red. He attempted to salvage control, his tone slightly louder now, almost pleading. "We must understand. This isn't about disrespect, it's simply..." Elias raised a hand, a small gesture that required no voice, yet commanded attention. He lifted his untouched glass of champagne and placed it carefully back on the table, deliberate and unhurried. The act, simple yet symbolic, drew every eye. There was no anger in his motion, only clarity. He was leaving on his own terms. Elias finally spoke, his voice calm, measured, carrying through the near silence like a bell in a quiet hall. "It is only a misunderstanding if you ever intended to see us clearly." The room froze. Sterling's lips parted as if to reply, but no words would reconcile the arrogance now laid bare. The executives and board members, who had been leaning on his authority moments before, now avoided his gaze entirely. His apology hung unfulfilled, swallowed by the room's collective realization of the imbalance of power. Margaret stepped forward, her eyes sweeping the room. Every glance she gave conveyed poise, dignity, and a quiet reminder of the authority Sterling had so arrogantly dismissed. Cameras flashed, phones recorded, but no one dared interrupt or challenge their composure. Even Khloe, still holding her device, seemed frozen as she watched the couple silently reclaim control of the narrative. Elias and Margaret moved slowly toward the exit, each step measured, deliberate. The chandeliers above reflected their calm, unbothered grace, casting the same crystal light that had once illuminated their mockery. The same halls that had seemed to mock their entrance now bore witness to their exit, triumphant, commanding, untouchable by the petty cruelty that had defined the beginning of the night. Guests who had laughed nervously moments before now whispered in awe, sharing glances that acknowledged the power shift. The murmurs carried words like respect, presence, authority, replacing the mockery that had dominated the opening of the gala. Sterling, left behind in the center of the room, stood rigid, attempting to grasp at the respect that had evaporated from the space he thought he controlled. The couple reached the grand doors, pausing just long enough to allow the hall to absorb the magnitude of the moment. Cameras captured their exit, a series of flashes preserving every detail. Elias's calm hand resting on Margaret's arm, Margaret's composed expression reflecting quiet triumph. The ballroom, which had been so loud with entitlement and scorn, now felt emptied of pretense. As they stepped into the night, the murmurs continued, not as laughter, but as acknowledgement. The Vanderlei Grand had borne witness to a reversal of fortunes that no etiquette or wealth could correct. Sterling's empire, symbolically shaken in that gilded room, now faced a reality that demanded respect. Respect the couple had never asked for, but had quietly, undeniably claimed. The night ended with the echo of footsteps fading under the chandeliers, leaving behind a room that had learned a stark lesson. True power is not inherited, flaunted, or assumed. It is embodied, earned, and never diminished by mockery. By the following morning, the world had taken notice. Grant Group's stock ticker flashed red across financial channels, numbers falling sharply as investors reacted to the viral video. Analysts, usually cautious with speculation, labeled the incident a catastrophic miscalculation in leadership and judgment. Khloe Industries released a statement that spread quickly across news platforms and social media. After careful consideration, Khloe Industries has decided to withdraw from the proposed merger. Our decision reflects irreconcilable ethical differences that cannot align with the values we uphold. The words rippled through the corporate world like a storm. Headlines ran, "Billionaire CEO's racist mockery costs $66 billion deal. Khloe Industries pulls out, corporate ethics under scrutiny." Khloe Grant's live stream had initially been intended as entertainment, a mocking spectacle. Now, clips of her commentary were replayed endlessly, juxtaposed with images of the Kholes standing composed under the chandeliers. The narrative shifted. Her mockery became evidence of bias, and Sterling's entitlement became a cautionary tale about arrogance in positions of power. Sponsors and partners distanced themselves immediately. Luxury brands and investment firms that had once courted the Grant name began suspending agreements. Internal communications leaked through social media. Invitations rescinded, sponsorships paused, and high-profile clients reconsidering contracts. Sterling's carefully cultivated network, once a fortress of influence, began to fracture in plain sight. Within the Grant Group's headquarters, tension mounted. Board meetings convened in emergency sessions, investors called in demanding explanations, and whispers of internal investigations circulated among the staff. Every misstep from the previous evening was dissected, replayed, and critiqued, leaving Sterling scrambling to salvage credibility. His confident demeanor, once his signature, now appeared brittle and exposed. Meanwhile, the Kholes maintained their calm. Margaret's words, spoken quietly during the gala, found a wider audience online. Power that depends on humiliation was never power at all. Across Twitter, LinkedIn, and business forums, the quote was shared and cited repeatedly. Commenters reflected on the significance, framing the Kholes' composure as a lesson in dignity, strategy, and integrity. Analysts noted the stark contrast between a public display of entitlement and the silent authority of those who had built their empire through innovation and hard work. Financial publications began analyzing the long-term implications. The $66 billion deal, once seen as a milestone for the Grant Group, became a case study in mismanagement and the hidden costs of arrogance. Opinion pieces emerged, dissecting how bias and underestimation of marginalized leaders could jeopardize billions, damage reputations, and fracture networks built over generations. Sterling's attempts to recover were met with skepticism. Public apologies and statements issued under duress fell flat, criticized for their tone deafness and lack of accountability. Meanwhile, the Kholes' presence in the media, calm and measured, highlighted the contrast. Their company's reputation soared, not merely from wealth, but from a visible demonstration of composure, ethics, and foresight. By the end of the week, the consequences were clear. The Grant Group had lost credibility, contracts were under review, and partners weighed whether future collaboration was viable. Meanwhile, Khloe Industries moved forward, their influence strengthened by the very event that had sought to humiliate them. The echo of the gala remained. In a room designed to exalt legacy and wealth, it had been humility, dignity, and quiet authority that reshaped the narrative. Margaret's words became a mantra in boardrooms, classrooms, and online discussions. The true measure of power is not in the ability to belittle others, but in standing firm with integrity, even under the harshest scrutiny. The corporate world had witnessed a lesson. Arrogance can collapse empires, but composure can build legacies that no insult can touch. Months had passed since the Vanderlei Grand incident, and the Kholes had returned to their own world, one they had quietly built from vision, discipline, and perseverance. This time, the spotlight was theirs to direct. Their annual foundation gala welcomed innovators, community leaders, and philanthropists. Unlike the grandiosity of the Grant Group's showpiece, this event was simple, warm, and intentionally inclusive. The venue glowed with soft lighting, not the harsh sparkle of crystal chandeliers. Conversations moved freely, punctuated with laughter and collaboration rather than anxious politeness. Guests of all backgrounds mingled, sharing ideas and celebrating achievements. The Kholes' presence, while commanding, felt natural, a quiet force guiding the energy of the room. Margaret stood near the podium, her gown elegant yet understated, her posture unshakable. As she began speaking, the room fell into attentive silence. Her words carried authority, but also empathy. We build not to prove we belong, but to remind the world that dignity is not an invitation. It's a birthright. Her speech resonated far beyond the room. Clips of her address circulated online, trending on social media, and shared widely across business networks. Analysts praised the Kholes for demonstrating that influence need not be wielded with arrogance, that real power grows from ethics, compassion, and steadfastness in the face of adversity. The gala highlighted the contrast between two worlds. While the Grant Group's legacy had been shaken by entitlement and public embarrassment, the Kholes' story now symbolized strength through patience and moral clarity. Every guest at their foundation event understood the subtle lesson. Respect cannot be demanded. It is earned through action and character. Elias, standing beside Margaret, moved through the room with calm precision, greeting partners and supporters without a hint of pride that had once been twisted into mockery by others. He embodied the quiet assurance of someone who knew that influence grounded in integrity far outlasts wealth leveraged through intimidation. The media coverage framed the Kholes narrative as a beacon of hope in corporate America. Commentators noted the sharp lessons for executives and entrepreneurs alike. Public displays of prejudice and arrogance have immediate consequences, while composure, ethical leadership, and inclusivity create enduring legacies. Margaret's speech concluded with a moment of reflection, her gaze sweeping over those gathered. Let us measure our success not by the power we take from others, but by the dignity we uphold when no one is watching. Applause filled the room, warm and genuine. Social media erupted with praise for the Kholes' grace, their narrative transforming into a national symbol of quiet resistance triumphing over arrogance. Business forums discussed the story as a case study in ethics and leadership, emphasizing that composure and vision outlast the fleeting authority granted by wealth and entitlement. The evening continued, marked by collaboration, generosity, and shared purpose. For every investor, journalist, and guest present, the lesson was clear. Integrity in the face of mockery is far more powerful than the empty spectacle of inherited privilege. By the end of the night, the Kholes had not only strengthened their professional network, but had reaffirmed their personal philosophy. Dignity is self-determined, respect is earned, and influence is most enduring when it lifts others rather than belittles them. In boardrooms, classrooms, and online discussions, the story of Elias and Margaret Khole became a reference point. A measured justice, quietly delivered, yet loud enough to resonate across the country. History has a way of remembering not the loudest voices, but those who acted with quiet strength. The Kholes didn't demand recognition or shout for justice. They embodied it through their choices, their work, and their unwavering dignity. Sterling Grant, once the symbol of inherited wealth and unchallenged entitlement, faded from headlines. News cycles moved on, leaving behind analyses of corporate reform, inclusivity initiatives, and discussions about ethics in leadership. The Grant family's name became a cautionary tale, a reminder of how arrogance and prejudice can erode even the most opulent empires. Meanwhile, Elias and Margaret Khole's influence only grew. Their foundation funded scholarships, clean energy projects, and youth mentorship programs across the country. Each initiative reflected their commitment to building a future where opportunity was earned, not dictated by birthright or privilege. Their legacy was measured not in billions, but in the lasting impact of integrity, compassion, and leadership grounded in ethics. The lesson of their story spread beyond corporate boardrooms. Social media users debated, shared, and reflected. What does it truly mean to wield power responsibly? How do we respond when faced with arrogance or discrimination? Could the way we carry ourselves in moments of injustice shape not only outcomes but perceptions for generations? Their quiet victory asked questions louder than any public confrontation could. How often do we underestimate those who choose patience over retaliation? How many opportunities for change are lost to the noise of ego and entitlement? And most importantly, what legacy are we choosing to leave behind in our own lives? For those who witnessed or heard of the Kholes' story, the answer was clear. True influence isn't measured by the fear or obedience of others. It's reflected in the respect earned, the lives uplifted, and the courage to remain composed when the world expects outrage. Now it's your turn to reflect. How would you respond if you were in Nicole's shoes? Have you ever faced a moment where composure and integrity mattered more than reaction? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear where you are watching from and how you would act in a similar situation. And if this story resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so you won't miss stories that challenge what we think we know about power, privilege, and justice. Every story we share carries a lesson, one that could change how you see the world and the people around you. In the end, Nicole's revenge wasn't loud, flashy, or immediate. It wasn't meant to humiliate or provoke. Their triumph was legacy, built in patience, fueled by integrity, and remembered long after the applause faded.